kind of cut and paste that into your although it's not pasting. I would say just refer back to that handout that was sent to you so that you can share that with your group when you're going through the exercise together.
Great, thanks, Chris. And it may take a few minutes to get everyone dropped into their rooms. And as you just saw, we are recording this event so that we can post this for members who intended to be here or something came up last minute, so that it actually will be housed on our website for later access. So that is happening. And we do have a lot of people here, so please utilize the chat function. And we do have members of the group of our committee looking at that. And if you have a question, we will make time to try and address those questions throughout this exercise today. But we also want to make you aware that if there is something, a question that you have for a specific individual or agencies, please try to make that connection over chat and take that offline afterwards to have more conversation about what it is we're talking about. That's really what this whole event is. It's a more networking type situation here that, again, when you run into a challenge in the field, you can say, I met so-and-so from this agency and they were very helpful. So make those connections over the chat today. Feel free to have those conversations after we leave here today, and really whenever you need to have that. So I'm going to look to Jill real quick to make sure we hit all of our initial welcomes. And if
I think we're good to go. Yes, and I've been dropping some things in the chat as they've come up. So I think we're good.
Great. So we'll get started moving. We're going to, again, look at part one of our exercise. I know everyone is interested in probably bringing 2 and 3, but let's work part one. We'll probably do that for about 30 minutes or so. And then at about 9:30, we're going to come back here and I will facilitate a discussion on how we handle part one. We'll finish that up, move to part two. We'll have a break, and then we'll finish part 3, and then we'll be done here early afternoon. So again, welcome to all of you. I appreciate your time being here and look forward to having a great discussion about this make-believe situation, but I'm sure it will ring true to many of you. So to our technical support, Rob and Ellen, you can go ahead and start dropping people in their rooms, and we'll see you all very soon. It looks like I'm headed to room 1, so I'll see you all back here shortly.
There's a couple people that are not part of our team that are not assigned. Should we assign them? Okay.
I think it's that they have not joined.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see that now.
Yeah.
Okay, good call out. Thanks, Ellen.
No worries.
Ellen, will you bring us back at 9:30 by just by the stroke of the time, or do we have to do that manually?
So I set it for 30 minutes, but I can also bring people back.
Nope, 30 minutes is perfect.
Okay.
Should I be assigned somewhere?
You probably should be. Let me assign you.
Can you assign me to one too?
Sure. You guys can pop in as
To anyone? Okay.
Yeah, to anyone.
Okay.
So just an FYI, you can't cut and paste text into chat. Like it wouldn't let me put it in.
Interesting.
I'm muted. Yeah, I had someone who said they didn't have the scenario, so I just said email me. So I've been
Okay. Yeah. I guess there's no easy way to do that. It's good to know. Like, I don't know why it wouldn't let you cut and paste into that. That's weird.
So I just to assign myself then.
Yep. If you go to under more
Okay, so we
Any
can just pick
breakout
our
rooms?
rooms. We can see who's in these rooms and
Yep.
decide.
Oh, exactly.
Under breakout rooms, is that where I
Yes.
go?
Yep.
So I see people who are unassigned, so the people
Yep.
here, but I don't see myself.
Oh, okay.
Is that-
I think what you can do is if you look at the rooms, so like see room 1.
Oh, I see, just join.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right, thanks.
Sure.
All right. Maybe I'll choose number
I was
6.
gonna say, how do we know who's joining what room?
I'll go in 6. It doesn't look like anyone from the committee's in 6.
Megan, are you looking for a room assignment?
Oh, I thought I was in one. Sorry, I had to restart my computer.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'll just send you over to one of the rooms.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Being recorded.
All right, I think everyone should be joining us here in just the next couple of minutes. So let's work down through this. In our particular group, we had some really good conversation. It actually went to a place that I didn't even anticipate, which is really the value of this whole project. But let's start at the beginning, and I'm going to try and facilitate this best I can with all of you. And I think we're going to have to use the raise hand, and I'm not sure how that's going to work on my screen, but let me ask, here's the first question. How can Robin help Janice? Does anyone want to take a chance and report out from their group, give a couple of examples of what you came up with and see if others had the same? So who wants to take a stab at it?
Let's see, John Nail here from my group. Am I on?
Go ahead, John.
Go ahead. What we were thinking there is that Robin maybe would start first with talking to the social worker where Janice is to see how she is doing and reacting to being where she is at and not seeing Robin, to see if there is some maybe emotional abuse that's happening there because of the isolation. And then if she is seeing that, then maybe Robin would then report to Adult Protective Services to check on her mental and emotional well-being. Those were the two thoughts that we had up front. And then again, knowing the possibility of escalating conflict or isolation. We're always in favor of communication and trying to resolve things in a family matter.
All right, thanks, John. I've got one question, and somebody in the group is going to set me straight, but you said social worker. Who of you out there is going to come in and swoop in and be that person? Who do we have? Because this isn't a law enforcement matter right now, but it is more the social services side. So whose agency does this? Who can the family reach out to and say, I need a hand?
Well, I know when you're in the hospital that you have, it's the case managers or nurse care managers or nurse navigators are the
I had her and I lost her.
We have several different, there's several different groups that can help out with that. There's legal services for the elderly. I mean, that's not a social worker, but we have so many ideas in our group. We had a lot of lawyers in our group too. There is the GLAD, which I cannot remember because I didn't take the notes what that exactly stands for. That could help out. The Ombudsman of Maine is a person. So this is kind of higher level already, but this is past the social worker at the facility. But these are all people that could be helpful in terms of helping poor Robin out. And then there are two groups. There's Through These Doors in Portland, and now I've forgotten the name of the other one already again. And I looked it up just a moment ago, but so there are several advocacy groups.
Martha's Cottage was the second one.
Yeah, it was the organization that runs Martha's Cottage that I was.
Elder Abuse Institute of Maine.
There you go. Thank you so much.
This is the note taker.
Yes.
And GLAD is GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders.
So that was kind of on a higher level already than just a social worker at a facility. But we had, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that I spent many years as a social worker case manager at a hospital, and for referring people and elderly to case managers and social workers, you have to have main care, you have to meet a criteria for, to have a true social worker caseworker work with you. It's a main care funded program. So as I've had very frustration, and I've had many people saying, well, I don't have main care. Who can I get a social worker to work with me to pay out of pocket and stuff? So they end up having to do stuff out of pocket. There is no social worker that I'm aware of. Maybe I shouldn't say no, but I'm not aware of any social worker in all my history that I can refer to somebody for case management to help with all this stuff without main care or financially eligible.
There are some programs for that, like I think Community Health and Counseling, MAS, they have case management for those who don't have main care. So you can contact the regular case management agencies and see what their funding sources are.
Yes, it's grant funded case management, for people without main care. It's a 30-day, it is there, but it's still financially eligible. And also the other thing is shortages. So it's a resource that's not available to be used.
I think the problem with speaking to the social worker at the facility she's in is that they don't have any motivation to help her get home. There's no reason for that person to be motivated to get her home and to help Robin, because they would prefer her to be in the facility because that's their livelihood.
If I can jump in here, my group, we have social workers who worked in a nursing home and social workers who coordinate in home care right now. So our first big concern was Janice doesn't have a legal representative. She doesn't have anybody talking on her behalf or representing her views on her behalf legally, and she's unable to communicate all that well on her own. So our first thought was Robin definitely needs some sort of legal service or legal advocate to help her with that.
Absolutely.
Because she's just kind of stuck there fighting with the family, and because they're not married, even though gay marriage is legal in the state of Maine, they're not legally married. So when we got to question 4, we were like, that would flip everything on its head. But at this point, everything's in the gray area, so they have to go by the blood relations.
So it's actually not in the gray area. We had a lawyer who looked this up for us in our group.
Right. Sorry, go ahead. That's what we were getting ready to say as well too. The Healthcare Decisions Act, which if you're going to discuss that, I think it's important in this one.
Go ahead, Andrew. I've talked enough.
Yeah. So yeah, we have a lawyer, Leo, from Legal Services to the Elderly, and he is the public policy advocate there and clearly knows a lot about legislation. And again, Patrick, this is why these things are so good, because you learn something every day. And so, there is under this, under the Healthcare Decisions Act, there's sort of when somebody can't make a decision, there's a step down process, much like it sounds like a will would be, right? Or if you didn't have a will, how things would work in probate. And a spouse is first in line, but the second is basically what would be considered like a long-term intimate relationship. So Robin actually does have legal rights. So I think the suggestion of one of the other folks to get legal services for the elderly involved, because it's not just, a matter of that, a social worker being involved. She does have the legal ability to be able to help out Janice in this situation.
Right. And that was something that we discussed as well, where there needs to be something legal in place if Robin wants to have any say so against this family who we were assuming they're pretty much tarnishing Robin's name, and they're keeping her away. And it was mentioned too that it can be considered unreasonable confinement in that case, which is a mandatory report to Adult Protective. But it did go back to there needs to be some legal paperwork in place. And the other concern is, and I've seen this, and I know the Adult Protective people here have seen this, let's say Robin gets guardianship. That family can harass her through the courts by challenging every single thing she does. So that was the other big concern as far as how do we support Robin in helping Janice. So our thoughts were, yes, Adult Protective, yes, legal services for the elderly. Equality Maine is going to be a big one, but it is going to come down to getting that legal paperwork. So I'm going
to pause you right there on the thought of what are the best practices. And this is how I want to wrap up this slide in just a couple minutes, but what should a family like hers or those in our communities have for best practice set in place now? So if this ever happens to them, they don't have to go through the mud here, but we've had a flurry of activity in the chat. And I'm just going to reach out to Chris and say, is there anything that we need to address, or maybe you want to share some of those things? So I'm going to pause for Chris Wolf.
That obviously, somebody mentioned that Kim Span mentioned there's a huge shortage of beds and services, for the facilities, and the facilities don't want to keep someone that doesn't need to be there. The bed will be filled as soon as they can turn it over. I think, I know of some places where, it's a shortage of bed for like low income people. Like there may be beds for people that private pay, but not so much for people that need that. And then Michelle said, we actually learned of the law in Maine, which reads one spouse to adult who shares an emotional, physical, and financial relationship similar to a spouse. Someone mentioned grant funded case management agencies. Please send the names of those agencies if we have them. And Hillary at LSE said the decision by surrogate statute, a long-term partner would rank above the family, but yes, a POA would be better. It's one thing we talked about when we were doing these scenarios is, maybe there'll be time at some point to say, what could have been done to make this better if we were to do this over again?
I have a quick question here, and then we'll move to the last one. But what came up in our group is at some point, the capacity issue of Janice is going to come up. And my question, and it was answered pretty eloquently in our group, but who is the person who administers a test of capacity? And then, because I'm hearing there's two different versions, we have a physician side of the house, and then we have somebody at legal services of the elderly that this is in their lane. They do this all the time. But if there's a test by a physician, how do you either you accept it or you don't? But is there any thoughts on that when it comes to a capacity test? Does anyone have any experience as far as how that goes and if they can be challenged on behalf of the loved one? I'll pause there for a second. Andrew, you got your hand up, and I'll just come back to you if somebody else wants to throw this up to respond to my question.
I got my stuff in anyhow, Patrick, so I'm good to go. I'll put it down if I can.
Good, because I don't know how. Does anyone want to try the capacity question?
I know it's one of the most difficult things. It requires a neuropsych eval to determine cognitive capacity, and we thought about that too.
Well, I disagree. I don't think it requires a neuropsych eval, although that is helpful, of course. And places like Legal Services for the Elderly, all the attorneys, we have a lot of capacity training. I use a checklist, like handbook thing, if the client has diminished capacity to make that decision. We often do things also like visiting with our clients more than once. Obviously, like making sure we're talking to many people, and it's a decision that I think that the lawyer needs to make with their client. It's not something that a medical professional can make if we're talking about a legal document and capacity to sign a legal document.
My understanding over the years that I worked in a hospital, that the psychiatrist would meet with the client and make that decision and fill out the paperwork, and the family would take that to the court. Now, am I understanding that that's not the alone, a lawyer can also do that?
So
I think,
in my opinion, capacities is really gray spectrum. So yes, as far as like a lawyer engaging with a client, they can determine their capacity within their own practice and within their own lane. But if they've been adjudicated and incapacitated by a probate court, then that changes their ability to enter into certain legal arguments, or legal documents, I should say. That being said, anyone can argue anything. So just because someone's been adjudicated incapacitated doesn't mean they're going to stay adjudicated forever. Guardianships can be reversed. And sometimes you can have a doctor complete a PP 505, but you can have another physician complete a neuropsych eval that argues against that person lacks capacity. And that's why we have hearings at probate court, and we have those kinds of discussions. So yes, a lawyer can assess someone's legal ability to enter into an agreement, but that doesn't mean a different lawyer wouldn't have a different perspective on it, or that either of those decisions could be preempted by someone being adjudicated incapacitated by a probate court. Long-winded way of saying it's really complex and not as black and white as we wish it was.
Brian, thanks. I'm going to go to Leo and then follow up with Bill Jenks. So Leo, go right ahead.
Thanks, Pat. First thing is that under the Healthcare Decisions Act, everybody is presumed to have capacity. Okay? They're presumed to have capacity. It doesn't matter whether she's had a stroke or not. And the primary care physician is the individual who can determine that the patient does not have capacity. Now, if the patient does not have capacity in the opinion of the primary care physician, then the section of the Healthcare Decisions Act, Section 806, which Hillary put in the chat, is where you look to see who has authority. So that the primary care physician would look to the next person on the list if there's no spouse, which would be Robin. The problem is that the family would not like that one bit. And so my guess is that we would end up in the discussion that Brian proposed. It would be the hospital under the Healthcare Decisions Act there's a protocol that's set up, and the hospital can try to get the parties to agree with respect to who has the right to make these decisions, or they can make common decisions. But ultimately, the family is going to have the ability to go to the probate court and try to get plenary authority to make decisions. But the point that I really wanted to make was that everybody is presumed to have capacity. And that's not something that everybody understands to begin with.
Leo, thank you for that. Bill, I'm going to finish up with you, please.
Okay. What really strikes me about this whole situation is that there's lots of resources, but somebody has to intervene to make Robin aware of all these resources. She doesn't. It's my reading of the situation is that Robin is not one to take a lot of initiative and to advocate for herself. and she's very passive about the whole thing. And who is going to step up and realize that there's an issue that needs to be addressed? There's possible elder abuse here. There's the potential for elder abuse. There's potential for all kinds of bad stuff to happen. But who's going to make people aware of the situation in the first place? I mean, this is a very realistic scenario. And Robin is not, even if she wants to make people aware of it, she's going to be afraid because of Danny and his dark moods, and afraid that he'll retaliate against her. She's going to be very reluctant to stand up for her rights and for Janice's rights. And I think the overarching issue is who advocates for Robin?
So can I ask each of you in your groups, because you'll have some time to work through that, but who locally, who is that? I think I know who I would reach out to in my community, but that may not be right. So if you could, when you head back into your groups here in just the next couple of minutes, ask that question. Maybe you do have those grassroots organizations locally, your AAAs. That's where I would go, but I don't want to dive into that just yet. But I want to wrap up the next 2 or 3 minutes. But if we had our perfect way, if we had our opportunity, I just want to hear a couple of tools that this family, and by that I mean Janice and Robin, could have in place that maybe we can all learn from clients that we deal with today. What are some things that they have right now today out there that could protect against this in a perfect world? I'll pause right there. Does anyone want to offer?
I think if they had this is Christina from Adult Protective Services, if they had an advance directive written, that would be very clear. They could have done a power of attorney to have in place, a will, any of those types of documents would clearly state what Janice's wishes were.
Thank you, Christina, for sharing that. Who else? Who's got an idea, something that be put in place?
Well, I think the obvious thing is for them to get married, to have gotten married long before this, as soon as it was legal, because that would leave the family without the power to just take over and step in the way they have.
Certificate of marriage. Okay. Leo, what do you got? You're on mute, sir.
Thank you. I think marriage for older adults is problematic, especially if you've been in a committed relationship for a very long time and you're getting Social Security or some other pension benefit because your financial picture changes when you get married. If you're a registered domestic partner, which I think is a more financially sound choice, that would protect you, and you would have all the rights of a spouse under the Healthcare Decisions Act. I mean, the surrogate, the second position under the priority section was written actually to protect domestic partners before marriage equality happened. So yeah, marriage is great. But if you're an older adult, you really have to think hard before you do that if you're in a committed relationship.
Leo, thank you. Ms. Knight, you get the last word.
Oh, geez, that's terrifying. I just wanted to hop in on that marriage comment too. I work with SAGE, which is Services and Advocacy for LGBTQ Elders. It's a program of Equality Maine. And something that we hear a lot from our older adults is that marriage is an institution that was denied to them for the majority of their lives. Many of them didn't even receive marriage rights until they were in their 70s or 80s. And so it's very unlikely for any of them to have, not all of them, but many of them to have pursued marriage even once it was legalized, because it now feels like something that has been denied from them for the entirety of their lives. And I had someone tell me the other day that she cringed when she heard me use the word wife to refer to my wife. And this is an old lesbian who's in her 70s. So there's also sort of like an emotional avoidance, I think, of that institution that has not been allowed to that group for so long. So I think it's also, you're more likely to find older adults who have been in committed relationships for the majority of their lives who are not going to get married, even though it is now a legal thing.
Great. It's a very good point, especially we're talking, as we talked in our group, they've been together for 40 years. This was, call it taboo, call it what you want, quiet, very enclosed, but now it's much more prevalent and open and discussed. So, hey, listen, part one, fantastic. I love all the discussion, the passionate information, the expert information. Let's dive into part two. We're really right on time. We'll do that for about 30 minutes. Come back in after that into the big room, discuss it, and then we'll keep trucking on. So thanks for the good work, everybody. We'll see you in a few minutes.
If you're in here and you have not been assigned to a breakout room, just let me know and I will assign you momentarily.
There it is. I just got kicked out of my room mid-conversation. I'm sure a few of you did too as well, but that's just the way it goes. Real quick, just to manage our expectations on timetable, we will stay in this room till about our break time of 10:45. We'll take a break and then we'll come up and finish. But as I indicated before, I wanted you guys to come back, or everyone to come back and say, what are our community services at this point for Robin? Who could she reach out to? Did anyone want to report back on that? And can I ask that when you do, I'll try to do the hand raise better, but when you do raise your hand, can you just identify, I see your name, most of them, but who you work for or who you volunteer for? That way, those of us on the call, if we need to reach out, if we don't get you specifically, we know the agency to ask the question. So who do we call? Who's got it?
Yeah, Patrick, I can go first. I'm Brett. I'm with Marshwood Center in Lewiston, Maine. I'm a nursing home administrator. We focused our conversation on essentially who's advocating for Robin, how are we looking out for her needs as well, where does she get picked up in the system? And in my industry, we're really looking at all those records. Who's my primary contact for this resident coming in to my center pre-admission? And then on day one, we're looking for family. We're looking for that long-term partner in their life. We assess the situation with Danny at the house. Get some financial abuse now showing really early in his stay. Obviously, there's some verbal abuse. We have some real security and threatening issues, and where those spill over into physical abuse. So how do we get her some information? So at our center, day one, we're required to start assessing the resident, and that includes everything. What's their home life like? Is there any trauma-induced care that we need to know about so we can care plan for that? So we're reaching out where she's especially not communicative. And we really haven't defined whether that's fully non-community or not, let's assume it is. We're especially looking for family and friends. We're going to be looking at the hospital records, the trajectory to a nursing home. Pre-COVID is a three-day stay. We'll return to that once federal emergency measures are sunset. And then that'll get us over to hopefully a doctor. I mean, we're not going to go to non-communicative probably in the home without some interventions in the past, an ER visit. So we're going to find this Robin person. So at that point, once we find her, hopefully she has the courage to relay to us that, yeah, there are some problems at the home. Then we can avail her to community resources, whether that's calling the police for assistance and telling them her story, or whether that's reaching out to APS. That office has been extremely helpful to the nursing home industry in the past, and even the DA's office has been very helpful to us with their elder and abuse subsection of that office. The Ombudsman's office as well, but Pine Tree Legal certainly can help out. Elder Services of Maine has always been a friend to advocate for folks like Robin. So we kind of went down through that list, and I don't know. Any follow-up, Patrick?
Well, I appreciate the holistic. Yeah, I appreciate the holistic view. And what's interesting to me is communities like yours or services like yours are spread across the state. And it was brought up in our group. Do we have, and this is to anybody, you can drop it in the chat, but do we have a document somewhere that lists all of these well-intended services by county? Is it in the back of a book somewhere? Is it in in something put out by APS, maybe DHHS? It was a question 211. I just saw it pop up. Just food for thought, because again, there are well-intended groups. And I'll say this in confidence to all of you. I think if Robin picked up the phone and hit whatever the group is, my gut tells me in this day and age, they're not going to say, Robin, I'm sorry, I can't help you. They're going to say, hey, I know so-and-so at this particular agency, and that is who you're better served. And I think as Maine residents, that's what we have going for us. We're small enough. We know each other. We're not in a huge state like Pennsylvania or Texas. We can offer these services, kind of like the no wrong door approach that we use, that we're going to get you connected with that help. So if somebody has a good idea that we can reach out to find those services by state for people who came to this really for the first time looking for those services, I think that would be
Patrick,
good. I see some stuff going in.
Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about this. You reminded me. A lot of towns, cities in the state, we worked with Jess Maurer and her group. And a lot of us have senior citizen advisory commissions, and our town hall has a lot of that information. Some of them have even set up resource centers where you can call your town and explore services available just like that. Maybe it doesn't help me after 4:30, but during the daytime, that's a start. We started one down here in Cape Elizabeth. We've had that for 5 years. I ran that committee for a couple of years down here, and we created exactly what you're talking about, kind of a resource center. And we even had a dedicated part-time employee thrown into the budget to help out. And I know a lot of other towns have done that under Jess's leadership.
Great, thank you. Chris, go ahead.
I just put it in the chat window too, but at Elder Abuse Institute of Maine, we are available to provide all kinds of resources, connect people with the resources they may need in their situation. I do a lot of outreach and education across the state. And at the end of my presentation, I gave them, all the contact for legal services, APS and everything. But even with all of that, people don't know where to start. And so it's always good just to give us a call. We have folks that have been on staff and working in this field for a bunch of years and would know, what's available in different regions of the state. But it's always worth it to just give us a call. And I just wanted to talk about our Martha's Cottage program too, because that came up in our discussion, and it's transitional housing for elder abuse victims. And so in this case with Robin, if she is being abused by the nephew and we can't easily evict him right away. She may be a good candidate for our Martha's Cottage. It's a transitional housing for people that can live independently, who are 60 or older, who need something temporary until they transition to something in a safe situation. We have housing in central or mid-coast and southern Maine. We serve the whole state. We so that could be an option for her too, just to get out of that unsafe situation while legal services is helping her with the financial exploitation and maybe trying to get Danny out of the house.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'm going to jump into the question here, but when she goes out to the mailbox and pulls out this bill from Citibank for 10 grand, where are we now? What steps do we take? And Shay, you may, I see you've got your hand up. I'll defer to you on this one. And then somebody else that we haven't heard from maybe want to jump in. Actually, Christina, you'll be next. So Shay, go ahead.
I actually had a point to the previous question. So Christina, you can go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just trying to, my video is being funny. So I'm a Christina Logan and I work for Adult Protective Services, and I actually specialize, I'm the fast social worker. So I specialize in investigating financial exploitation. So my next steps, once she found the $10,000 Citibank card, was multiple. First, I would contact Citibank, notify them that it was fraudulent transactions and that she hadn't opened up the card so they could start an investigation into it and likely would reverse those funds. I would either have her, or if Adult Protective was involved, I would get permission to run a credit check to see if there was any other fraudulent accounts. And another one of our group members brought up too that perhaps we should look into Janice's credit report as well to verify if there's been anything fraudulently opened in her name. I would have her contact the 3 consumer credit agencies and get a credit freeze on her social security number so no new activity could happen. And if she needed support with that, she could be referred to the Federal Credit Protection Bureau, and they could kind of walk her through those steps and put safety precautions in. I would have also, if there was an APS involved, I would have a referral made for an investigation to start and or get law enforcement involved to investigate the financial exploitation also. I think that.
Thanks, Christina. I want to hold the APS piece for just a question, and maybe somebody who works for APS will want to jump onto this one at the end. But for the law enforcement members here, Detective Ryan Chubbuck, he was in our group, so I'll leave him alone. But does somebody want to jump in and say how they would handle, or if they've experienced these types of calls for service before, what they can do for the victim at this point? Excellent. Well done. So here, and I'll leave Ryan, I'll actually pause. Do you want to jump on it, or I'm happy to either way? Yes, I will. So for law enforcement, this is something that does fit squarely in our lane as far as we now have a crime. The question or the tricky part is, and it kind of references to what you're reading here, because we do have a crime and it is against a person, she doesn't necessarily have to say, I want to press charges. She has options, but I would recommend in this particular set of circumstances to make the report, memorialize the information we have so it sets a time and date stamp when it was reported. Because if we're looking for some level of protection, and it sounds like we're going down that road, this may be a catalyst for an order of protection through the court as another event, a series of events that are occurring to Robin at the hands of Danny. In fact, we had an attorney in our group, I don't know if he's still on the call or not, he said, what if we have this backwards? What if Danny's the good guy and Janice is the bad person, and they're trying to dissolve that relationship? And now you start to see how it really reads, where Danny has now showed up. She's out of the house. He's making these statements. He's committed a crime. So it helps in that regard. But even though there's a report made of theft, and this is felony level theft, it doesn't need to be acted upon unless she is willing to do that. So that's kind of how things work from the law enforcement side of the house. But I would strongly recommend that prosecution or no, or willing to cooperate or not, it should definitely be documented. So I wanted to cover that from the actual crime side of the house. Any question or follow up on that?
I have a question for APS. When they show up at the house, and a report's been made and they show up at the house, can the patient say, I don't want you here? Or what's their rights and responsibilities as APS?
Thanks, Heidi, and we'll see who. Brian, are you going to be the one to handle it?
Yeah, I'll field that one. Yes, they can say, I don't want to talk to you, and we can't force them to work with us. That doesn't mean that we won't talk to the alleged perpetrator, but we'd probably come back, in this case would probably be Danny, but we would discuss how to follow up with that if someone's refusing to work with us. And, we'd also talk about capacity and things like that as well, if that's a factor.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to go to Amy real quick, and then we'll go to Ms. Schultz.
I was just going to add that we had said the same thing, that Robin should call the police and file the report, which would possibly trigger a protection of abuse and be able to remove him from the home, or at least start an eviction process too.
And it's Scholes, not Schultz, right?
Well, yeah, I'm not going to be that picky. And Renata, I noticed you avoided trying that one, that part of the name. I don't blame you. So I was in Amy's group as well, and we talked about the importance of finding out whether or not she actually has any ownership of the house, and before we can, with the whole eviction process. But what I actually raised my hand for was that our hope was that our hope and dream was that the police, that she would call the police, and that the police would be able to provide her with the resources such as, who to call next, whether it be adult protective or a whole slew of other people, and whether or not that sort of information is available for you all, whether you have that and are able to provide her with that. Oh, look at that. He has it right there. Perfect.
So this is what we call a radar card. It's something it's actually 6 or 7 years old, but basically it was developed by all of you really back in the day, people who came to the table and said, hey, we need to have something in the field for really anyone who wants it. There's nothing top secret on this card, but it's a referral. It's some questions, some tips that we can work with in the field. And it just, there's some questions asked there, but it's just a tool that we have. And I present this to anyone who wants it, and you can all if anyone needs this, don't have it, wants to read more, we have quite a few of them for distribution. They're better in the field than on a shelf. But yes, we at that point will be able to make some referrals, because although, and somebody set me straight from APS, and maybe it's not APS, but I do not feel at this point from Pat Hood's perspective as a mandated reporter that we have made it to a mandated report. Because regardless of whether she wants to press charges or not, if she decides that she doesn't want the police to be involved, I think that's a bad decision. But that doesn't necessarily speak to her level of capacity or whether she's in danger. But I'm going to pause there because I wanted somebody to answer that question for me, who is a mandated reporter. Have we made it there in your opinion? And if so, really what happens? That's right. I'm looking for a hand. Somebody wants to jump up who wants to tackle that one.
I'm a mandated reporter, and I would definitely report that. I would not hesitate at all. Whether something comes of it or not, I would report it.
Okay. Brian, do you want to, and I assume, Brian, do you work for Adult Protective Services?
Yeah, I'm a program administrator up in Aroostook for APS and public guardianship. Yeah, I think it's appropriate to report. That being said, like the capacity piece, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of a gray area. So if she has capacity and she wants this situation to continue to happen or doesn't want to take steps to make it happen, we're not really in a position to make that decision on her behalf or to try to force that upon her. That being said, if she's considered dependent, then it's definitely something that we would be able to look into, and depending on how old she is and what her needs are, she could be considered dependent based on the APS statute. So I think it's fair to make a report. Definitely something we'd look at.
And I was just gonna add, like, I see these cases all the time. And I mean, I've had cases that people have capacity and even are not dependent on others that have come across. And, you know, I think it's always beneficial, you know, if there's cases like this, for us to come out. A person may respond one way to law enforcement, but they might respond a different way to adult protective. Because, you know, whether it's pursuing a criminal charge or just looking into it, it can impact their eligibility for long-term care. So sometimes people may be more open to us looking into it because it might help them receive benefits later on, if that comes in, rather than like the side of, you know, the perpetrator being charged with a crime.
Christina, thank you for sharing. We'll take one last comment if somebody wants to take us into break. If not, Chris, I know a good comment just popped up there in the chat. Maybe a good time to roll through that.
There's a lot of great comments and resources being shared in the chat. And so we were just conferring amongst ourselves, the committee here, and we're going to distill this and share this with the group so that people will have all the resources available. So the latest comment was just if APS was called, they may give her options or resources she was not aware of. You can never go wrong with reporting a concern. And so I've often said that in my outreach programs. It's, you know, you can never go wrong with following your intuition and making a call. The worst that can happen is somebody might get angry at you. But if you don't make a call, then you're really putting that person at risk. And so trust your intuition, always make a call. You know, it's like I always tell people, just call us if you don't know what to do, or call our, you know, Carol, you put a little blurb in here about our helping voice. It's a warm line for mandated reporters. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about what APS can and can't do, and whether something warrants a report or not. And so you can get coached through that process, and that can be anyone. You don't even have to be a mandated reporter. If you're a concerned neighbor, you know, you can call this line and figure out what to do.
Chris, thanks. All right, she has brought us to break time. So we're going to take 15 minutes and truly take 15 minutes, feed the fire, grab some coffee, stretch your legs, but we'll plan to be back here at 11 o'clock. Thanks, everybody. Don't log off. Welcome back, everybody. My US Cellular time says 11 o'clock, but we'll just wait for people to jump in as they come back with their coffee, tea, water, banana. I just want to let everyone know that we do have set aside about 15 minutes at the end. If there are any questions that come up or you have something that you wanted to ask. So just keep that in mind if you make a note, if it doesn't get answered as we go along. This has been really great interactive discussion, but unfortunately in this type of arena, it's hard to get to everybody. So again, just keep in mind, we've got a few minutes at the end. So we're going to move into the final phase, part 3. And then they're going to put us in our breakout rooms for about that same amount of time, 20 to 30 minutes. We'll come back and then we'll wrap the whole things up. So Alan or Rob, we're all set to move into our breakout rooms.
If you all could let me know what room you were in previously, I can put you in that room.
I didn't notice, this is Jess. I did not notice what number room it was. I apologize.
That's okay. I can just assign you randomly if that works.
Yeah, sure.
Same works for me, thanks.
Sure.
I got booted and need to be reassigned, I guess, or re-channeled.
Sure. Do you know what room you were in?
That would be helpful, wouldn't it?
Or could you tell me someone who was in your room?
Yes. I gotta put down a name. Ben.
Let's see.
BEM, I think it's her name, Bem.
Okay.
Ben.
Well, oh yeah, there we go. All right, I will assign you. If you, so everybody else, if you know what room you were in, I can assign you back. And if you don't, I can assign you randomly. So just let me know.
I don't remember which room I was in.
Okay, I can put you in a random room.
meeting is being recorded.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. For the last time in the big room, we had some pretty spirited discussion there at the end, and we got kicked out of our room again. So that's a good thing. So let's again, we've got some time at the end for some questions, and I do have a couple that came up in our group. But let's tackle part 3. The simple question: now that we know Robin is now the victim of not just one credit card with a balance on it, she's the victim of theft at least 5 times over. And we see she's made the decision about, okay, I'm going to start to take matters into my own hands. She's going to stand on her own 2 feet and have this conversation with him. And to be honest, when I read this scenario for the first time, this is a total mess. So I'm curious, and whoever wants to take the first stab at it, but when she arrives at home and drives into this mess, likely there's going to be some calls made, probably to law enforcement. But who am I calling? Who's going to be in my corner to help to help pause this situation that we're finding happening right now? And I'll do my best to work through the hands for people who want to take a shot at it. Christina, yes, please. And then Andrew, number 2.
Okay, so we had some questions that kind of went first that we wanted, like, what is this piece of paper that he threw at her? Was our big question, because we didn't think that there would be anything that he, from the scenario described, that he could evict her on the spot. Unless some type of injunction was ordered to seize the property. So our first call, our first step would be for her to call the police. Because we talked about that, really they're the only people that are going to respond immediately in that moment. And in that moment, she's lost access to her house, I'm assuming the majority of her possessions, and is now homeless. So we said, call the police. And then, we have some other things, but if other people want to talk, I can kind of let them take over and then come back in if still needs to be added.
Okay, we'll have Andrew jump in and then we'll come back to you.
Can I make a quick comment on Christina's? The other thing we talked about too, she should probably leave the residence and call 911 because he's clearly mad at her and throwing things at her. So she could be in a lot more danger in that situation. And then clearing her from the residence, it kind of makes it safer for those responders if she were to call 911.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly reasonable response. 100%. Andrew, please.
So I think where we came to eventually, although I was slowing it down, but I think calling the police is the right thing. You can't just kick somebody out of a house. She's able to show that she has, her possessions there. She's been living there for a while. He can't just unilaterally do that. But we don't know what's on that paper either. But our big thing is that, look, she's going to need to get legal representation now. I mean, I suspect that probably he's done some lying in order to get some sort of legal rights to this property, and that she needs to, the best thing she can do right now is get a really good lawyer to start trying to combat whatever it is that this guy is trying to do. So
I absolutely agree. And again, once police get there, and it's different. Look, if we're in the country where we primarily patrol along with the sheriff's department, it looks a lot different than it looks on Main Street in Westbrook or Main Street in Portland, something like that. The resources are a little bit more stretched out. So our role, regardless of where you are, is to make sure that we do have a safe place, and we need to start asking some questions. I know the eviction process through experience takes time. There are very few opportunities where people get the, as I said in our group, the habeas corpus by law enforcement and off they go. At no time is it ever appropriate for these two to go hands-on to remove somebody. Never, ever. And that maybe give us a nexus to do something to remove the problem party here. But does somebody, and this may be a good opportunity, that can quickly walk us through what somebody would legally have to do in time-wise to evict somebody? Because that's pretty gray, even in my mind. So I'll pause right there. And Andrew, I know your hand's still up. I don't know if it's because I didn't lower it, because I don't know how, or whether you've got something to add.
No, I'll lower it. So thanks, Matt.
Angela had to jump off from LSE, but who else? Hillary, you've jumped in quite a bit. Is this something you want to try and tackle as far as how the eviction process works normally?
I mean, sure. You know, you can't just kick someone out. You have to actually go to court. She would have had to have notice first, and there's a whole procedure. And only after a judgment is entered, they would still have to wait to get a writ of possession, which is the last piece of paper in an eviction action. Once that's served by law enforcement, an individual who served with it has 48 hours to leave, or they become a trespasser after that point. So law enforcement is generally good about knowing that unless there's a writ of possession that has been served, that they're not going to kick someone out of a property they've been living in. And they will say it's a civil matter and direct them to, you know, go to court if they want to evict someone. So I would be shocked if whatever paper he threw at her actually had any authority to prevent her from staying in the property. And in my group, I said that she should call law enforcement first to prevent the illegal lockout, and then she should get a lawyer. So.
Anyone else, lawyer type? Shay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not a lawyer type, but I was going to ask Hillary too, like as far as the eviction process goes, like at that point, you know what, I'll come back to that.
We'll come back to you, Mr. Jenkins.
Hi, yeah, don't just follow up on what Hillary said, because we talked about this a little bit in our group. I don't think that there's any way that he properly could evict her right now, but it doesn't mean that she should be staying in that house with him either. And so that becomes kind of a complicated situation, and something that they would have to figure out. The other part of it is, if he is trying to sell the home, I just would give a suggestion for folks to get in touch with LSE as soon as possible, because even if he's selling the home and has, you know, forged a deed or done something improper, once it's sold, it's almost impossible to unring that bell and get it back. And so if he's acting like he thinks he can sell his property, there are legal mechanisms that can be put in place to prevent that from happening, but only before the sale occurs. And so it's really time consuming. So the sooner you can get in touch with a lawyer, and I'd say LSE is a great option, the better, because once that property is sold, there's no way to get it back.
And that was actually going to be part of my question was, he already stole her identity for the 5 credit cards, and he can use that information to do, I think it's called deed theft, which I saw was an issue in Penobscot County for quite some time. So I didn't know if you guys had any thoughts as far as like, what are the resources for a victim of deed theft?
I've not experienced that on the law enforcement side, but I do hear commercials about just what you said. People are stealing that information electronically, and you don't know until something happens. And I'm not so sure. I'll pause again, but if anyone's ever experienced that from the prosecutor side, or if that's been an issue here in Maine, I'm hoping it's not as prevalent as in other places.
I'm not exactly sure, I guess, what you mean by deed theft. I know there was in Penobscot County, there was a big story about it was actually someone like impersonating and getting into an attorney's emails to kind of divert a wire transfer in a real estate closing, which can be an issue. But there would still be some options depending on how and who he transferred the property to, if he did have even the right to do that. Like if it was a family member who is, you know, in on the exploitation, that gives more options than if there is what's called a good faith purchaser. Then you're really in trouble, because if the buyer doesn't know about all of this stuff, then you might not be able to do anything to get the property back, which would be the goal.
kind of exploring the behind the scenes. We know that she trusted her bank personnel, and that's something we had a conversation on the side, how those relationships are really something that I see in Maine is very coveted, that when people have problems, in this example, Robin, she trusted that frontline banking personnel. But when we talk about looking at credit files, what came up in our group is, number one, how does somebody freeze that? And number two, how does somebody lock that? Typically AARP has addressed that for us, but do we have an expert here that can address how those two things happen in the world of credit files for further protection for Robin?
In my experience, you have to contact the 3 credit bureaus. So Experian, TransUnion, what's the third one?
It's Equifax is the
Thank
third
you.
one. You're welcome.
Thank you. So you have to contact each directly and to do the credit freeze. You can put a credit alert or a credit freeze. So the credit alert will provide a extra layer of verification, but doesn't close out your social security number from getting new accounts, whereas the credit freeze locks it down. And I'm sorry, I think I forgot your second question to that.
Well, I see Nicole Bilodeau has jumped up with the hand up, so I'll hand it over to her because I know this is definitely in her lane.
Yeah, Nicole Bilodeau. I work for the Maine Bureau of Financial Institutions. It is correct. You have to contact each of the agencies. But what my concern is, Robin could do that on her behalf, but I'm not sure how we would lock down Janice's. But it is a concern, and would certainly, if she didn't need any financing, to freeze those, and then you can actually unfreeze them for a certain amount of time if you're looking to finance for a new car or whatever, but they stay frozen until you unfreeze them, and generally you get a password or something of that sort to be able to do that. Now with electronics, a lot can be done very quickly, but yeah, each of those should be done with each of the agencies. And along with your comment, Lieutenant Hood, our state chartered financial institutions do have working relationships with many of their customers or members, and especially the older adults. It's kind of maybe not weekly, but it's an opportunity to get out of the home, and so they get to know these customers fairly well, and they can certainly tell when somebody's rattled or maybe even looks disheveled compared to what they usually do, or maybe just not their bubbly self. And those financial institutions have great resources available to them as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Nicole. And again, I think that's one of the beauties of living here in Maine. We're big, but we're small enough to have those community members. And I see Vanessa shaking her head, and it is very important, because there's no doubt that the banking community is often that first level of that safety net to catch some of these concerns that are popping up. And I think there's probably many stories that never get told about just that. And I know Vanessa shared a couple in the past, but it probably happens every day. So Kathy, you have a question for us or have a comment? Go right ahead, please.
Another comment. It wasn't raised up in this particular case scenario, but one thing that could make this situation significantly worse is if Robin was having some kind of memory issues or cognitive decline, so that she was maybe not as well able to, inform other people or reliably say, no, I didn't do any of these reports, any of these credit cards, or could be potentially induced to sign things that that she wouldn't if she, was not be in an abusive situation. So we could have even greater challenges than were presented here. So.
No, you're 100%, Kathy. I think this has created an opportunity for all of us here to really, for those of us who this falls in their lane, to shine and say, I am your person, I am your contact. And to go back to the beginning, that's what this group is all about. This really close 80 to 90 people that say, I'm your contact when you run into these problems, or I am your option when you have a problem, need a place to go. And that is what's so important about all of us coming together and being that face for the agency. So when that time does come, whether it's an easier scenario, or as you said, Kathy, this could be much worse. We could have different elements that we're not even thinking about now that do happen in our communities. But I do strongly feel that having these conversations now, these made up scenarios, but probably not too far from the truth, make us so much more better prepared to address those type of things. So as it relates to this scenario, our group said, look, we've seen this happen over a span of time. We don't know how long it's been, but let's call it weeks. And we see an opportunity in phase one where we have the initial concerns pop up. And there was discussion on protection from abuse order. Imagine that we chose, with the assistance of either DV advocacy group, to walk Robin through an unfamiliar place. Could something like that early on prevent this mess on the actual curbside going out? I just wanted to launch that and say, does it make sense to help people work through okay, we're here now and it could be this much worse in the past? I know that's doomsday thinking a little bit, but has anyone actually gone through that and have seen the benefit of not getting to the doomsday place? I'll just pause there and let anyone want to respond to that.
We had talked about the mandated reporter thing as, because I think most of the group were social workers. Because the law is you just have to have a suspicion of abuse, neglect, or exploitation to make a report. You don't have to be able to prove anything. So we had actually thought when the first scenario where Robin had concerns about Danny's behavior, his moods, the eye color changes, we had discussed whether or not that would have been the appropriate time to make an adult protective referral and connect her to either the domestic abuse resources, start the eviction process, or at least get a little bit more information, education on what I think most of us all saw as a pretty obvious red flag there.
I also like the idea of, and we'll work on this, is trying to figure out what in the community is the answer. What are some of these options that you may not be privy to at that point in the investigation? Who can you come alongside of? Because somebody somewhere in this group has gone through it and has probably learned something from it. Renee, go ahead. Although I got your name right, there she goes.
It's Renata. One of the things that we talked about in our group was that it struck us that she might be somewhat isolated, and that, like, it's very well and good to say, this report should have been made and all this, but she may not have anyone that she felt comfortable confiding in, that she has told about this situation, nobody that would think to report, and she's clearly not thinking to do it herself. So I think the social isolation is probably one of the most important things to combat for us to be able to make sure that these things are getting reported, that somebody else is having some kind of eyes on people, so that that report can be made and the ball can start rolling.
If I could jump in too, and just share that the work that the advocates do, we work with Elder Service Connections. We work when APS closes a case. We can often go in and, help support that person who's had this happen. And I have a question about, I don't know if anyone here, but it seems like banks or, financial institutions sometimes don't have like a real stringent set of like, I know banks are really working hard to, protect people's money, but it seems like if this guy could just set this up without some sort of authentication, is that the word, of who the person is, besides just maybe a social security number or a credit card number or whatever. Because I've seen a few cases where that's happened. A bank will slip up and or a person will give their information over the phone. That person will call up and set up an account in their name and their numbers, but it's not double, triple checked with the person. So, I just think about things like that. Like if are banks doing enough, and are they working with us to try to find out, what is needed? How did this happen? And then I talked about in our group about, once, say, Danny either goes to jail or ends up in legal land, the victim needs a victim advocate to work with, to have support and safety. And so that's my 2 cents.
I'm going to ask for somebody who can answer that question, but while we do that, Ms. Knight, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's NEM, which is, I know, scary, but something going back to the early intervention comment a little bit, something we talked about in our group that's not particularly helpful in this situation, but maybe could have made a difference originally to combat social isolation, is that Equality Maine has a program that's currently called SAGE. It's about to undergo a name change, but it specifically services and advocacy for older LGBTQ adults. And one of the main things that we do is provide community support. So Hillary suggested a referral to SAGE. So go to the Equality Maine website, and the SAGE calendar is on there. There's a virtual happy hour that takes place twice a week. That's a really great support network of just older LGBTQ adults. And we've got dinners that are happening throughout the state. There's a bunch of stuff that's kind of growing in there. But one of our thoughts was that maybe if she had a group of peers, that she maybe would have been more likely to share, and also they would have been more likely to be looking for some of those things that specifically impact people in their community. So tossing that out there.
Nem, thank you. Nicole?
Yeah, on the banks and credit unions having to know their customer, it is a requirement that they know their customer. And so I think this would be easily disputed with the sense that they could show that it wasn't Janice's signature. They would probably ask for financial information as well. So my biggest advice, because in the part 1, it says that he was rummaging through some paperwork. It's like, I have to stress is if you get those credit card applications or whatever in the mail, if you don't intend to join them, shred them, so they're not available to anyone. But it is a responsibility of the financial institutions to know their customers. So it can be disputed.
Great, Nicole, thanks. Jessica from Seniors Plus.
Hi, I was thinking more of the trying to do prevention for these things to happen. I'm the community education supervisor here at Seniors Plus, but trying to do more public outreach and education on how to keep yourself and your finances, or whatever the case may be, keeping yourself safe. Reaching out to your area agency on aging, and maybe having people like trying to get from other financial institutions, or having somebody from law enforcement just come give presentations. People, I find, want to know, they want to be educated. So offering more of those options for folks to attend to hopefully prevent some things like this, so they have the red flags themselves when encountering a situation like this.
Jessica, it's great advice. I think we've gotten away from it quite a bit due to all things COVID, but it is important being out in the community and spreading the good advice or even the red flags widely amongst those groups, and just to pay attention. I totally agree.
If anybody
Ellen,
wants to do a presentation, they are welcome to email me, just saying.
well played. Ellen, go right ahead.
So I've been mostly a fly on the wall, running some of your technical stuff for this meeting, but I also work for the Maine Credit Union League, which is the trade association for all the credit unions in the state of Maine. So I'll just throw in there that, yeah, this shouldn't be able to happen. Now, obviously, every financial institution is only as good as their frontline people. But there's a pretty robust, a couple of pretty robust training processes that credit unions go through, and banks are likely, it's a little bit slightly different for banks, but it's pretty much the same process. So, you know, the key is, it is easier to set up accounts when it comes to, or fraudulent accounts when it comes to online or over the phone, but they do need certain verification documents. So it's not, I mean, it's not as though we're not aware of the fact that these things do occasionally happen. But yeah, there are pretty strict requirements about how credit unions and banks open accounts, and for whom they can open accounts. And, you know, you have to have some verification. You need a signature, you need information as well. So it is not as hopefully not as simple as it seems, but of course there are always ways for people to get around it if they're intent on doing harm.
Thank you, Ellen. I will graciously hand it over to Vanessa.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Nicole, also for talking about the financial side. I did want to just take a moment to share the example of like the Citibank credit card application. The call out to shred those is great, but also in the scenarios Danny was rifling through, and we call that social engineering. And what that means is essentially he's worked on stealing her identity, social security number, mother's maiden name, physical address, everything that you would need for him to basically imposter himself as her. And unless she is using some kind of current credit monitoring, like a Credit Karma, Savvy Money, any of them, and utilizing that level of technology, it could be very difficult. I know our focus is on the older population, but I will tell you that social engineering right now is happening for children because they are issued social security numbers and they're not having their credit frozen by parents or grandparents or whomever is their guardian. And there is incredible fraud across this country and internationally with Americans' children as well as seniors being victimized. So it is a form of social engineering. It's a form of identity theft. It's extremely difficult to combat if you're not doing that in person, because we are, of course, a world of technology. There is what we call e-signing, and there are many requirements at the federal level to ask pertinent questions that only I and I alone should know. And those out of wallet questions are asked to identify who I am. It's no different than when you go to TransUnion or Equifax or Experian and you have to try to identify yourself to freeze your credit. Those same questions that nobody else should know, unfortunately, that information has become available. It's called deep public information through all of the breaches that have happened in this country. So the volume of, I would say, social engineering identity theft is at an all-time high, and vigilance for people is paramount. And I know we try to do a lot of education for our members, but if anybody has a great way for people to actually read what we send out, or being willing to engage in conversations, that's where we always run afoul. And the fact that we have fallen on desperate times and those are going to get worse, these individuals are hyper victimized as well. So I know that there's always more we can do, but in this age of technology and so much being done, not face-to-face and not ink signature, that's the way the big banks are doing it. That's the way all of us as small institutions are surviving as well to stay relevant. The challenge is real and we're doing what we can to educate, but everybody needs to be their own advocate and protect your number. My best advice is if you're not actively pursuing credit, freeze it. It doesn't matter your age, freeze it, protect yourself and regularly check on it. So I apologize for a little bit of my soapbox, but I hope that's helpful to some of you on some level. I can tell you my nieces and nephews, I've told my brothers and sister-in-laws, and they've already frozen their credit. And there were actually draws on their social security numbers. So it is real. It happens.
Vanessa, thank you. 100% great advice. Mr. Kinney, go right ahead.
Thank you, Lieutenant Hood. So I would agree a lot with Vanessa there. Working in consumer protection, we receive consumer calls on the line, and a lot of them are fraud and scams. And unfortunately, they do come from the older generation. They're about, giving information, and sometimes they're tricked, deceived. They're unknowingly giving information that they think that, they're to the IRS or Social Security or, or Medicare. For these examples with Robin, I do believe, something would help too, would be like, right off the top of my head, I thought it was like a lockbox, something to keep, if it's something personal, something that you can hold in your hand, put it in a lockbox, that way, lock and key. That way, if she does have guests that come over, especially ones where she's questioning, she can protect that information, especially if it's hers and her partner's. But for sure, if she has outside sources that are trying to get information, like I said, scammers, they're good at what they do, and they know every question that you're going to try to come up with. Every no, they're going to have a yes, and they're going to, so they're going to have every type of scenario. And they're going to try their best to keep you on the line, talk to you through email, whatever it is, to try to get you out of your, Social Security, date of birth, money, whatever it is. And typically wire transfers, MoneyGrams, those type of things, that's gone. Those it's pretty much impossible to get them back. So I think that education comes from all of us here, and that whether they're reaching out to a caseworker, it's really just okay, taking off my hat as a state employee, this is what I would tell you, because I would tell the same thing to my parents, right? So
it's all fantastic advice, and I appreciate it. And the more that we can share that widely in our communities, the better off, and the more people that we can protect. Chris, go ahead.
I just had a question, with that teller that worked with Robin to navigate her credit report and finding out those exploited cards that were on her credit report. Is a bank teller a mandated reporter? Like, I'm just wondering, like, so then she found out and then she then let her go. Like, I'm just wondering, like, is there, like, could the bank teller have counseled, like, said, you might want to call the police, in this situation? Like, I don't know if there's any kind of like if you see an elder who's being financially exploited, is there any requirement on a teller to report that, or to help counsel, or to, it would just make me nervous. Like, I just gave this information to this person. Now she's going to go home and confront this person, and I'm putting this person at risk. Like, where does that lie with the financial institutions?
I think Ellen has it. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so our financial institutions do not include mandated reporters. There is information out there explaining, when it might be appropriate for them to make a report, and we try to keep that. Keep providing that to our institutions across the state. I think in some places they are mandated reporters. It becomes problematic though, if you think about the people who are interacting with your, thinking about your frontline staff at your credit union. A lot of the times there's pretty high turnover. You've got some, you know, sometimes it's, you know, college kids home on break and they've got a job for the summer. And making them a mandated reporter may not be the best situation. But we do have, I mean, we use Senior Safe. There's been a big push for AARP's Bank Safe. On a lot of banks and credit unions across the state use those to educate their staff. But again, you know, if you're asking a 22-year-old to counsel, that's not really an appropriate position to put them in. Now, ideally, maybe that 22-year-old goes and talks to their manager and says, hey, something doesn't seem right. And we do have that happen an awful lot. But from a, you know, frontline interaction, that's a pretty heavy burden to put on somebody who has probably limited experience and limited training. Now, we have tellers that have been in the position for a really long time. They probably feel more comfortable, but I don't think we necessarily want our, you know, entry-level staff to be the ones providing counseling to this situation.
Ellen, thank you for that perspective. And it truly does make sense. There are different levels. And I do know that, and I've heard over the years, but it's that referral to that manager within the branch. It has that specific knowledge and level of expertise and quite frankly, comfort level to handle that. It's pretty clear we've made it to our Q&A part, and I think we've really worked through this problem. But are there any questions that came up that haven't been answered? A question for somebody here that is an expert in a particular field while we have this tremendous group of knowledge together?
There was one question in the chat, just are credit scores still free on a weekly basis right now? I know after the breach years ago with Anthem, there was something passed in Maine where people didn't have to pay for the freeze or didn't have to pay to get credit reports. Does anyone know the answer, like whether that's still free?
I believe it's still free to freeze your credit report. And I did link the FTC article that they are doing still weekly free credit reports through next December.
Hillary, thanks for sharing that. I often, with the people that we serve that have some type of fraud, I direct them to that ftc.gov site so they can jump to the actual free credit report with little fanfare, no chance of messing it up. So I often use that, and it's beneficial. And I've used it twice for me, and I would recommend that all of you check yours as well, based on some of the conversation we've had here. So I'm looking at the time, mindful that everyone here has plenty to do, I'm certain, but I do need to just make some closing comments for a second to make sure there's no other people that have any questions. But this is an event, as many of you know, that comes around annually. We have two. We have the summit, which is a more formal, larger attended guest speaker, national look, and we have this event that's much more close knit by the people in our community that we are going to reach out to when we do encounter problems. Probably not calling everyone with good news, but that's the beauty of this group. But every time that we conclude one of these events, you will be sent an event evaluation at the email that you registered. In the group that puts this together every year, through the Education Awareness Committee, sit down and look at every single comment. We want to bring relevant, important topics to this group so that you all, understanding your time is very valuable, leave here with something you didn't have before. So we ask that you please take the time to fill that out. Be critical. It's only going to make us better, but if we're doing something well, we're happy to hear that. We are going to work on mining the resources that came out of the chat throughout the morning, and we will be able to share that as well. So look for that. And I'd just like to take a second and again, identify the people that are our support here. This technological piece is very important, but Ellen Parent and Robert Caverly both have supported us many, many times. And they come from the Maine Credit Union League. That's a free service that they are giving to us, and we are entirely grateful for that and appreciate the relationship. And it's fantastic that Ellen feels that she does have some expertise to lend to us because of her day job in our conversation. So I'm very thankful for that. And I just want to quickly identify the members of our committee that bring this to you: Jill Randall, Chris Wolf, Dana Morrill, Jamie Demers, Vanessa Medor, Polly Campbell, Regina Rooney, and also Katie Condrat. But we are very passionate about the work that we do. And we do appreciate the time you spent today. I've said it a couple of times. We collectively are the safety net for many, many people. Some will know, some we just won't. But the work that you do day in, day out, the volunteer work day in, day out, I personally thank you on behalf of the council for doing that great work. Look forward to continued relationships together. And before I close finally, I'll just ask Jill Randall if there's anything as far as the CLE credits or anything else that we need to address before we give you a little bit of time back in your day.
No, just email me if you'd like me to, with your name and bar number, if you'd like me to send that information on to the Board of Bar Overseers. And we will be emailing certificates of attendance to everyone. And so we would just ask people from other disciplines to seek credit through your licensing authority with those certificates.
Jill, thank you. I appreciate it. And again, for everyone else, thank you for your time today. We appreciate the work that you put into this. We did ask you to work, and I think we definitely got that out. So until next time, be safe out there. Enjoy the bonus warm weekend. It's going to be a great one. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.